Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first research seminar for the year for the Centre for Social Impact. We have Dr. Liudmila Tarabashkina here with us today. Huge number of people have registered for this event, showing a great interest in the topic of social marketing. Let me begin, though, by acknowledging that we're on Liudmila land here at UWA and pay our respects to the elders of this land. So very warm welcome to you all for our first seminar, as I mentioned. This seminar has a huge number of people from different parts, academia, but a large number of marketing communications people, and from the social purpose sector as well as academics and students and so on. So we're going to have Mila speaking for around 25-30 minutes or so, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So just remember to put into the chat area questions later on that you have, but we will also open it up and you can ask the questions directly. We want to make this interactive, but for the time being, we'll just have Mila speaking, and great to have you along, Mila. Mila is a senior lecturer in the business school here. She's in the marketing department, has a quantitative and behavioural data science background, and does a lot in terms of experimental research with consumers. What we are interested in today, of course, is this connection between the world of marketing and the social impact world. And as you can see from the title of this session, From the Cause of All Evil to Marketing for Change, that's what we're about today. So welcome, Mila, and over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Paul and Carol, for the invitation to have this talk today about marketing being perceived as evil and moving away from this perception to something which can be more impactful. Now, before I proceed, I would also like to acknowledge the country that we are situated on, Noongar land, and that Noongar people remain the spiritual and cultural custodians of their land. Now, before I proceed, I understand that I have a very diverse audience today, and not everyone may know the definition of marketing. Very often when I talk to people who are not involved in marketing, I get a perception that people view marketing as a very simple activity, which is about sales and discounts. But actually, it is much more than that. And the definition that I really like to use for marketing to demonstrate what it's actually about comes from the American Marketing Association. And it's actually suggesting that marketing is the activity, or it could also represent a set of institutions and processes for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging offerings. And these offerings can be tangible products, they could be services, or product-service hybrids, a combination of two. And all of this happens for the exchange of the value. And I have this word highlighted in this very big font and red color because this is at the core of marketing, to deliver value to consumers. And as you can see, consumers can be very diverse. We can call them clients, we can call them partners, and we also view it as a society at large. So for the money we pay for products or services, in exchange, we get value. But how marketing actually derived to the concept of value, it had a bit of a long journey. But marketing is actually a very young discipline. It originated in the 1900s, and it's believed that the first marketing course was actually taught at the University of Michigan in 1902. But back then, it was very simple. It was about the production and distribution of products. So we, as manufacturers, make something, we think we've done a good job, and we satisfied consumers' needs, and then you as a consumer buy it. This is how it actually started, and it was very simple back then. But if we move to the next 20 years, and this is how marketers and everyone likes to sort of split the time frame, from the 1930s to 1950s, we actually see changes in marketing. We have very important concepts introduced in marketing, such as market segmentation. When marketers realize that consumers are very different, it's just not enough to manufacture a product and think that they would buy it, they are very diverse in their needs. This is when segmentation came in. And also marketing piggybacked on existing technology, and marketing always does. A lot of money has been spent on radio and TV advertising. This was an amazing time frame, like golden years of marketing, because this is when marketing borrowed a lot of knowledge, a lot of frameworks from other disciplines, which were psychology, anthropology, sociology, and social psychology. And these were the years when marketers really, based on what they've learned from these disciplines, were able to understand what makes consumers tick. And when that happened, that resulted in an amazing product diversity. We could buy products such as lipstick in any color. If you wanted to have jalapeno or super salty ketchup, you would also have that product availability. So this was an amazing time, which also resulted in a lot of production and growth in a lot of economies globally. Now, if we look at, apologies, my clicker doesn't work. If we look at the 1960s and 1980s, this is another very important era for marketing because it's the era of marketing mix, where, I apologize, my clicker is acting up, where marketers developed the iconic 4 Ps, where they said it's important to develop a product that satisfies consumers' needs, sell it at the price, which is affordable, offer it at a place where they would be able to buy it, and also advertise, in other words, promote with the most effective strategy to convince them to purchase the product. Now we look at the 1990s and also 2000, and this is when there has been a very significant shift in marketing, where marketers said it's not enough just to have great 4 Ps, but we want to be in a relationship with the consumer. We want to engage in a relationship marketing and offer the needs that they want. Cradle to grave marketing was also becoming very popular back then. And this was also the time frame for the development of digital technologies and also global expansion. This was an amazing time to learn from neuroscience, how brain works, how consumers experience emotions, how they feel. This was also the great time for the development of internet and social connections between consumers using social media. And now if we look at the time frame where we are situated now, this is 2010s to 2020s, we are in the era of big data and actually data-driven decision-making and also digital marketing. And this is when personalized experience of consumers and also tailored messaging or tailored advertising became very popular. And this is the time of metaverse. I hope a lot of you are excited about that. Virtual reality as well, another type of experience for consumers, ever-growing amount of data that consumers are living, and of course, artificial intelligence, impossible not to mention it. And this is the time frame when consumers left so much information online through the likes and shares, cookies, you name it, and it was possible for marketers to understand their profiles, personas, and hence develop that tailored messaging when we could tailor advertising to suit the needs and deliver value to consumers to offer personalized experience. Now, this is the future, 2030s onwards, which is not far away, just in next 4 years. And personally, I think we are in for a ride because it's going to be big, exciting, unknown, with a lot of new technologies, AI as disruption, and a lot more emphasis and impact being given to data-driven decision-making and minimizing the risk for marketers. Now, why is marketing considered to be the cause of all evil? I've showed to you that throughout all these years, marketers have learned a lot from other disciplines. This is one of the key characteristics of marketing. Marketing is a very young, energetic, ambitious discipline. It doesn't mind learning from other knowledge bases where they can get something that can benefit us. Why it's also considered evil, and I think this is the core of my talk today, is because throughout all these years, based on all of the observations of consumers and the knowledge, we were able to understand how to create, communicate, and deliver value to consumers. And we have developed numerous frameworks to do that. We teach them at university. This is, for example, a very famous Bain & Co's elements of pyramid of the value, which we teach at MBA level courses. And this is basically how we usually start our introduction to marketing principles. Because we have a lot of people coming from industry, we always ask them, which value are you offering? If you, for example, in the B2C, business to consumers context to your consumers, and if you are in business to business, we're asking them about this pyramid. When we teach entrepreneurship to our students, we always ask about how the value proposition that we are offering meets the needs, the customer profile. And this is the very famous framework from Strategizer, which I really like. And I've acknowledged the sources here on the screen. So if you want, you can revisit them and read more about those frameworks. Also, throughout the years, we were able to understand how consumers make decisions. We know that some decision making is very cognitive. It takes longer. Consumers process information very thoroughly. They weigh pros and cons. It has high involvement, usually applies to purchases that are very expensive. And we also know that there is emotional decision making, which is purely driven by emotions such as fear, happiness, and so on and so forth. It's much faster, it's less cognitive, there is lesser attention consumers pay. And we know there is also decision making, which is combines the elements of both. And we've learned as marketers to use the techniques, appeals, and strategies to actually tap into them so that the message really resonates with the consumers and impacts them. The best example of the decision making, which is in between, is the house purchase, because it's very expensive. So you think a lot about it, but very often it's driven by your emotions because you would like to have a particular kitchen or something else, or you would like to even pay more, for example, right, to get it. So it's really driven by both. We've also learned throughout the years as marketers how we can effectively use colors, because we know that color impacts consumers on emotional level, and it's possible to prime using the color. What is prime? It's actually a very famous psychological technique when we try to steer decision making or thought process in the desired direction using those stimuli that we have at hand. And when it is color, we can imbue certain associations in consumers' mind and kind of help brands to develop brand personality or particular association. So let me show you an example. This is the most typically used colors, but of course there are other variations, but we know that red draws attention. It's the color of fashion, movement, and in some cultures, it's also color of luck. Orange makes people hungry. If we want to make our brand look optimistic or positive, we would use yellow. If we want to project perceptions of something natural, something about life, wealth, and privilege, we would use green color. A lot of tech brands use blue color because it can communicate trustworthiness, responsibility, and dependability. Purple is the color of luxury, creativity, and spirituality. And black color is, of course, for luxury products because it communicates class, elegance, and sophistication. And another framework which I wanted to show you is a very famous Maslow hierarchy of needs, which we adapted to marketing, and we use it to actually pick the best appeals for advertising. And these are just few of the examples of the frameworks that we have. In fact, we teach consumer psychology or consumer behavior for 12 weeks for the whole semester, and it's just one of the units. So there is a lot more out there. There are special templates for brand architecture, and there are other frameworks that can be used. I cannot cover everything in this very short talk, but I hope it gives you an impression of how the knowledge has been systematized throughout the years to apply to different products, product categories, or brands. And that brings us to this question, why marketing is evil. And I think now, especially in the current state of technology, it is because consumers themselves tell us what they value. And this happens because all of us use mobile phones or technologies using desktop and desktop screens, and we leave a lot of digital footprint behind ourselves on social media, on the internet. And using all of these, marketers can actually understand your profile, your persona, what you like, and they do it, or we do it, by looking at engagement. What do you like? What you comment on? The saves, the shares, your private shares, indirect messages, replays on Reels. We also look at that. Clicking on see more. Your scroll behavior is also something that can provide very valuable insight. Hover or linger behavior of the mouse or your finger tracking on the mobile phone screen. So with all of these, I hope you understand that it has never been more exciting to be a marketer, because there is so much data out there. And that allows marketers to engage in data mining, profiling of the consumers, to understand who is the profitable customer, who is a less profitable customer, and engage in a lot of data-driven decision-making to inform the strategy. And I think this is where I see value becoming a bit of a threat, because sometimes consumers do not understand how their data is being used. And that value at the moment also is associated with a number of negative outcomes for the consumers. I'm sorry, my light went off. I hope you can still see me. And this involves planned obsolescence, where sometimes products become, they need to be replaced very frequently because technology changes, or there is an upgrade in technology every once in a while. That value from all the abundance of products also creates a problem of waste, because manufacturers are really good at manufacturing products, but we are still not great at managing the waste and converting this into a loop system where we can create circular economy, when the waste of one company can become a valuable resource and can be reused by another company or other companies. And also, just because we have so many different products and consumers have a lot of choice, sometimes their consumption behavior can have negative health consequences, and also consequences for the environment and society, to name a few. So here actually comes social marketing for rescue. And you may actually think that social marketing is a recent development, but it's not. It is actually not as old as the mainstream marketing, but it's relatively younger, because it was conceived in the 1971, when Philip Kotler and Gerald Zeltman published their seminal work in the Journal of Marketing, which was called Social Marketing, an Approach to Planned Social Change. And even though there were some initiatives for social marketing and consumer education before that, it was in the 1971 that this term was officially coined and it was published. And what does social marketing do? It seeks to develop and integrate marketing concepts and principles. So we are borrowing now from the mainstream marketing, which it has very commercial nature and intention, with other approaches from other disciplines to influence individual behavior. And we do that so that it benefits that individual and the communities for the greater social good. This is the definition that I really like, and it comes from the Australian Association for Social Marketing. So what do these marketing concepts do? Have we borrowed from the mainstream marketing in social marketing? One of the most influential framework was about the fact that to change the behavior, you need to educate consumers first. You have to increase their awareness, you have to work on their knowledge, and once they get all information, then they would change their attitudes, and then they would change their behavior. And with this in mind, social marketing has borrowed this framework and other types of frameworks to influence the behavior. And over the next screen, I will actually show you the types of behaviors that social marketing is targeting. And it is a lot. Some of them focus just on pro-social behaviors, when we want to encourage people to donate to charities for social causes. Some of them also focus on volunteering, anti-bullying behavior, when we try to educate people to behave differently. Some strand of social marketing is looking at promotion of safety behaviors, where we encourage people to wear seatbelts, to follow the speed limits, not to use mobile phones while driving. And of course, this is not the exhaustive list of all the behaviors. There are a lot more out there. I just thought I would show you the most typical ones. There are, of course, behaviors related to health dimension. And this is where we also have a bit of intersection with public health, because in these campaigns, we are trying to change habitual behaviors of consumers, trying to, for example, reduce smoking, increase their physical activity, encourage them to consume healthier foods, reduce alcohol consumption, and so on and so forth. And of course, the last big chunk of research and intervention campaigns is around environmental behaviors. They are sometimes called pro-environmental or sustainable. These are all synonyms. You will see very different terminology, but actually it's all the same. And here we are trying to encourage triple R, which is reduce consumption, reuse products, recycle. The others could be you reduce your energy or water consumption, use public transport, fly less, or buy carbon offsets, install solar panels, or buy e-vehicles, and so on and so forth. My area of research is looking more at the environmental behaviors. And in the second part of my talk, I will give you a few examples from my research where we try to tackle the problems that social marketers are facing. Now, I will show you a few examples of the campaigns that are used in social marketing, but I need you to give you a warning that some of them can be a bit confronting. I use the actual images of the campaigns, but I did acknowledge the source on the main slide, so you will see it very soon. So I gave you a warning that some of those images are confronting, so let's go. Here is my favorite example of the campaign on the left-hand side, which is targeting women, trying to discourage smoking. And what social marketers are doing here, obviously, they are trying to increase consumers' awareness about all the negative health consequences and the implications of smoking, such as much more wrinkly skin, much worse overall appearance. And they also tap into emotion of fear, assuming that this would be enough to discourage consumers from smoking. On the right-hand side, you can see another campaign, which is also targeting smoking, and it's coming from the Australian government. And as you can see here, there is a lot of educational information which is provided to consumers to increase their knowledge and awareness, assuming that that can change their behavior. And all the benefits are listed here in 1 week. Your sense of taste, for example, will improve in 3 months. Your lung function will improve in 12 hours. Carbon dioxide will leave your bloodstream in 1 year. These are the financial benefits in 1 month, in 5 days, in 12 months, and so on and so forth. And what you can see here is the value consumers have in smoking is being juxtaposed to a value, long-term value to you for your health. The only problem is that you may see benefits of this quitting behavior only after some time. And the earliest or the shortest or the soonest one is actually in 12 hours, based on my reading of this advertisement. I'm not trying to criticize those ads. I'm just trying to show you that social marketing at the core has the need to educate the consumers, increase awareness, and then it's using some very often emotional appeals to communicate value to them. And this is an example of anti-gambling campaign, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen. It's called What Are You Really Gambling With? They have multiple ads for different target segments. This one is for elderly people. And here the main appeal is not necessarily educational. It's tapping more into emotional decision-making, into fear and shame, saying that the value of quitting gambling for you is that you will stop lying to everyone. So emotionally, you would feel better, and you will also maintain your social relationships that you have been having for such a long time. This is an example of the campaign that comes from National Geographic. At its core, it's educating consumers about the amount of plastic that ends up every year in the ocean. And it's asking you to make a choice to stop using plastic. And the value here for you is that long-term, there would be better impacts and outcomes for the environment and also for the future generation, and you are choosing the planet. This is the campaign that focuses really on education. There is nothing emotional in here. This comes from Victoria State Government, the campaign that educated consumers on how to recycle properly. Over the next page, I'm giving you a warning. I will show you a very graphic picture. This one comes from the World Wild Fund for Nature, and it's trying to discourage consumers from purchasing exotic animal souvenirs when they travel abroad and bringing them to their local country. It is based, as you can see, on disgust as an emotion, and also has an educational component because it reminds you that if you purchase those products, you will be participating in the slaughter of animals. So the value for you is actually feeling better about yourself and saving those animals and the nature. These were just a few examples, and the list will go on because there are multiple campaigns launched every year and in different countries. But what I would like to steer the conversation now towards is the challenges that social marketers are facing. And the first challenge is around funding. To increase the awareness, to change the attitudes and the behavior, we need funding, right, to communicate those messages, educational messages, to multiple stakeholders. And very often the behaviors that social marketers are looking at, they receive funding from public sources, non-for-profit organizations, or they require government injection of cash. And cumulatively, if you look at the amount of money that's spent on particular particular behavior, it may not be always efficient because the industry may be spending more cumulatively. It's not just one company that may be promoting its product or service, but cumulatively there will be multiple brands that are advertising at the same time. But to make real impact, social impact, you need an ongoing education also because money runs out, generations change, and you consistently need to communicate the message. So funding is an issue. Another issue is the complexity of the problem that social marketing is targeting and the complexity of interventions. This very nice image comes from the Australian Association of Social Marketing. And it's a very nice framework because it shows you how complex the issues are that social marketing is targeting. You may have an intervention on individual level, on the consumer level. Then you may require interventions on the micro level, such as family, friends, and peers. And why we do that? Because a lot of learning comes through family, through friends and peers. The meso level is about schools and workplace. Why? Again, because we learn from other people, and we know that thanks to almighty social psychology and sociology. And we also know that social norms, they are very influential when it comes to behavioral change. We also have the exo level, which includes local politics, communities, and also the macro level where the legislation takes place, economy is being regulated, and the culture. So as you can see, there are a lot of levels, there are a lot of stakeholders. Obviously, a lot more funding is required. And on this circular, on the outer circle here, you can see all the possible strategies that you can use. And this is what we actually borrowed from mainstream commercial marketing. You can use storytelling, you can use videos, you can also promote on television, social media, and so on and so forth. But as you can see, some of the approaches here, again, can be very expensive, such as television. The next biggest challenge is that behaviors we are tackling, they are very habitual. They have been formed for a long time, and we know that consumers are notorious for liking habits and following the routines because it saves cognitive effort. It's much easier because then you can save all your resources for more important decision making. And other behaviors, they are very pleasurable, and they may impact consumers on pleasure hormone levels. So we are talking about impact even on a biology and chemistry level. That is why it's very hard to change those behaviors. And the last challenge, which I think we're facing, is about the actual appeals and content and whether we communicating value to the extent that is persuasive and will resonate with consumers. And communicating the value in social marketing is very, very challenging because there is a value in obviously engaging in this less healthy or antisocial behavior. And change is always hard. So how do we communicate value in such a way that it's easy, interesting, and it can be internalized by consumers. So this is where I will give you a very humble and very small example from my own research, where we try to create value from a slightly different perspective for consumers. And we looked at pro-environmental behaviors, specifically the reuse behaviors. This green circle with 3 R's actually taps into the problem of overconsumption and throwaway society, and also planned obsolescence. And at the moment, recycling, or for a very long time, recycling has been proposed as a solution. But if you look at the research on recycling, you will notice that recycling has its own cost. And this cost is associated with the collection of the waste, management of the waste, fees and wages you're paying, reprocessing cost. And if the plants are running not on sustainable solar panel, that is not a very sustainable recycling we're engaging in. Recycling also works really well only when countries have established reprocessing facilities and infrastructure. And we know that in Australia for a very long time was exporting its waste abroad, but that has changed. And now the policy is to actually build a lot more recycling facilities in Australia and take care of the waste. And we also know that when consumers figure out that items, products can be recycled, they tend to overconsume more because they feel that someone else will take care of their waste. Reduce is also not feasible often because of the planned obsolescence. Products just break down and they need to be replaced. So what is left here? Reuse. And under reuse, we have 2 options. You can either reuse the product at the end of its life cycle without making any changes to them. For example, take this metal can from your tomato sauce and convert it into stationery holder. But if you change its physical shape, color, punch holes through it, do something to it, then you engage in upcycling. And what do we actually know about upcycle and reuse? I think I will skip through this because I'm keeping an eye on my timer. Is that this is not the behavior that's practiced by everyone. It's practiced by creative individuals and financially disadvantaged people. And when we were looking at this project, reuse was not very popular in Australia. It's more used in developing countries because there are fewer resources. But in Australia, it was mostly practiced by selected individuals. So the question for me and my team was how to make these behaviors interesting, reuse and upcycling, and how to create values for consumers so that a lot more people engage in this behavior. And this was the outcome of our project, which we published in 2022. And we started looking at how to create value to consumers. We ourselves didn't have a lot of money and funding for the project, so we had to come up with something which is easy to execute and is low cost, not just for us as researchers, but also for the industry that could use our approach. And we thought, well, let's go with the cheapest approach and ask consumers to imagine the actual process and then get value from this imagination. And this is exactly what we've done. We've consulted psychology and we found a creativity priming technique, which allows consumers to engage in problem solving and unleash creative mindset. And we saw that we could use one of these techniques to help consumers imagine, reuse, or upcycling better. And this is exactly what we've done. We've exposed one of our groups to the creativity priming, but we told them that the purpose of the project was to research product creativity. So we disguised the purpose and we encouraged them to go through this exercise, and then we primed their creativity. Then we used a conventional environmental appeal where we told them that recycling is not the one of the options. You can still reuse, upcycle your products, and we gave them the examples. And of course, because we had to have a control group, we had a group that actually didn't get any nudge, any intervention, and we asked them to describe their typical weekday. So what did we do? After we allocated people to each of these conditions, we asked them to imagine this process. This was what we were betting on. We wanted them to imagine it, and we wanted them to think about all possible uses for the metal can from the tomato sauce, and we asked them to write them out. And the idea from this imagination task is that we actually wanted them to get inspired by this process. This was the cheap and low-cost intervention for us because it was happening in consumers' minds. We just wanted to know which of these interventions would be more effective in creating inspiration and result in a better imagination. And then we measured their reuse and upcycling intentions. We counted and coded the number of ideas that they generated to get their quantity and also their quality. If their ideas tapped more into reuse of the metal can, we coded it as less creative, so it had lower quality. If it tapped into upcycling, they said, I would punch holes, create a candle holder or a robot toy for my child. We coded it as more creative. We also measured their individual creativity, how they self-rated themselves. And this was our first study. So what did we actually find? We find that less creative people generated a greater number of ideas, and the quality was also greater when we gave them a bit of a help. We unleashed their creative mindset. The worst outcome was in the environmental message and the control group for less creative people. And here, what we found is that the number of ideas was not related to inspiration. We were quite surprised. We thought quantity and quality matters, but as it turned out, it was only quality. And then inspiration was related to their future reuse and upcycling intentions. So what did study one tell us? One super creative idea is enough to steer inspiration and then result in greater self-reported reuse intentions. And all of this mostly comes from creativity priming. Interestingly, our very creative people performed well in any conditions. They could generate similar number of ideas and their quality, and they were inspired all the time. But this is not the type of group we are targeting. We are targeting people with lower creativity rate. Because this was just intentions, obviously it wasn't enough. We had to measure real behavior. That's why we've done study 2. And before the actual allocation to experimental conditions, we asked them to report their past reuse and upcycling behaviors. Then they went through the same interventions. We executed imagination task, measured inspiration. And in 8 weeks, we remeasured their reuse and upcycling behaviors for the past 8 weeks. What did we actually find? We find very similar trends, and actually the increase in reuse and upcycling behaviors for the participants whose creativity was unleashed and who got really, really inspired from our exercise. But because all of this is really researcher-induced task, it's really a lab experiment. That is not enough for marketer or brand take the strategy and execute it, right? So what we've done is we've designed our next study, which was our study 3, where we show them a brand. It's grayed out because I cannot show it here. But on its packaging, we had a message for them to subject themselves to creativity priming. In other words, imagine the last time they were creative, and think about all possible ways they can reuse it. So we encourage them to engage in voluntary imagination process. And what did we actually find? Those people who voluntarily primed their creativity and voluntarily imagined this process, they got excited more than those who did not, those who ignored this as part of the product packaging. And when they got inspired more, they also reported greater intention to reuse or upcycle products in the future. So where does this leave us? I guess for us, it was understanding how we can create value, low-cost, cheap interventions, and something that can be very inspirational for consumers. Because once they get inspired by the process, they are more likely to internalize it. Hearing messages about the amount of waste, about the nature and environment degrading is something that we have been exposed for a very long time. Some consumers may be desensitized to it. So for us, it was important to look outside the box and come up with strategies that can be executed not only in the lab by social marketers, but also by the brands, to encourage brands to also integrate waste management as part of their brand strategy. What I've showed to you may not fit all types of behaviors that social marketers are targeting, but I hope it helps to steer the conversation towards looking at how we can communicate value better to consumers and also have a much larger social impact in the end. This is everything from my side. I thank everyone for your attentions, and now we're ready for questions.
Thank you, Mila. That was really great to have that broad overview, but also to have some of your own research being presented. So we're going to open this up for questions. If you have a question, raise your hand. You can also put a question in chat so that we can respond to questions in chat. So as you're doing that, a thought came to me that I've seen social marketing in a number of different areas, and you mentioned the environmental area, the pro-social behaviour in terms of a social marketer helping a social purpose organisation to increase donations, for example, and certainly in health promotion. What I'm really interested in is the case of social marketing working alongside those who are in social purpose organisations meeting major social issues. And this is an area which I think is quite exciting for development. So what I'm thinking about is, say, financial counselling. Those who are supporting those in financial need, they're getting into trouble. What I'd like to see in the future, and this is the question, are we seeing this in social marketing and in social marketing research? The social marketer sitting alongside the financial counsellor, the social marketer sitting alongside the drug and alcohol counsellor, the social worker, in terms of behaviour change, positive behaviour change that is in line with the goals of, and we'll call them the consumer, who aren't called consumers necessarily in social purpose organizations, and we want to keep that point that they're human beings and so on. But I can see that as a great new world, and I'm interested to see whether you've seen much of that in terms of social marketing.
That's a very valid and important question, Paul. I think what happens always depends on the training and the background of the people who are engaged in delivery of services. Let's say if these are services to assist disadvantaged communities or people who struggle financially, very often we would have social workers there, and by training, they are trained in psychology and sociology. With social marketing, there could be an input there because social marketers are trying to make their communication quite obvious. There's a lot of work being published in this area, especially on literacy, when they realize the importance of financial literacy and that we have to teach it from very young ages, not necessarily when people are adults, but we have to start really early. The same as nutritional literacy, so that people start making healthy decisions. So personally, I see quite a lot of research being published in this area. But sometimes, and this is just the nature of how research sometimes is created, not all of it is open access. So not everyone has access to it, right? So sometimes practitioners may not be able to see all the knowledge that is available out there if they don't pay for a particular article subscription. But this is changing. I know that a lot of universities Australia-wide, they now pay for subscription, and a lot more journals have been published with open access, which is really great, and especially in social marketing. So the knowledge starts permeating the industries that are affected, or the frontline industries that actually delivering those social services, right? And I think the platform like this is also very influential because we have very diverse audience today, and we are trying to create that synergy between what we have in social marketing and what is happening on the ground. Because sometimes amazing solutions can be made by people who deliver products and services, and we as academics don't know them. So conferences, talks like these, seminars, workshops, they are always amazing because you have the exchange of ideas.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Mila. Okay, so opening up to the audience, and Silla, I think you're first off the cab. You rank? Silla, yes.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Mila, for your presentation. It's very interesting in terms of the history of marketing, and also the work you've been doing in environmental behaviour change and social marketing. I've done quite a lot of work myself in my area, in my career. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about, the concept of value and also the challenge of getting funding for these programs. One of the things I learned about value in a marketing context, particularly around products, is if businesses start to understand they're actually in the business of delivering a service and not a product, they tend to start then looking at what's called that concept of long-term value creation. For example, I mean, I worked in the water industry, and in terms of behaviour change around customers, for a start, we were able to convince the Water Corp that the customers are assets. Their behaviour is an asset, and we're able to put in place programs that actually put in place behaviours around 2-day-a-week sprinkler rosters, which are now embedded in the community. And that has saved a lot of money in terms of deferring the next capital source. So then that was around, we deliver services to the community. They want gardens, they want clean clothes, they want to be able to wash their dishes. They don't actually want water. So I guess what I'm wondering is, are you working with the companies up front to start to say you're actually in the business of delivering a service, not a product? Say fashion. Fashion's a classic. We're in the business of clothing you. What if we, gave you the clothing, then we take it back, and then that whole concept of them recycling, and then you can build that relationship. I just wonder if you've looked at that right at the top end, because I think getting the funding, if you can make the argument to those that hold the purse strings, particularly in corporations, that this is the better long-term value proposition, I think we can start to turn some of this behaviour around and start to save a lot of money for consumers and corporations.
That's a very good question. Funding is always an issue. And what I've observed from Australian context, there needs to be a shift in how commercial brands think about what they deliver. Very often they think about the value that comes from the product and its usage from its manufacturing. And making them think about the waste as a value is a big problem, right? A lot more companies need to do that. But at the same time, there are a lot of constraints for businesses why this may not be possible. For example, their products can be very complex. They consist of multiple alloys, ingredients, and it may be challenging to recycle them efficiently, right, to break them down. So that could be one of the issues. Sometimes when there is a certain percentage of plastic, it may be challenging to upcycle textiles, but there are some innovative technologies and people out there saying, well, it's still possible, it just costs more, and there isn't much money available, right, to invest into those technologies. So that the waste is a big problem especially in the environmental context, because we're not good at reprocessing the waste, but creating the circular economy is the way forward. But then there is also, if you look at textile industry and fashion, there is a lot of competition among brands, and who should you give your textile to? Are you a competitor? Yes or no? So that actually requires a change and a shift in their thinking that we are not competitors, but we are part of the same ecosystem or the same environment, right? And that will take some time, but I think we are making steps towards it. There are circular initiatives in textile in Australia. There are also companies, especially in the tech, they want to buy back or accept back their waste, and then they extract precious resources out of it, and then they put it into the next product. It's more about businesses understanding this value, because I think for a very long time they didn't think about it. It was more about, I manufacture. We want cash flow, and then our job is done. But now the game is changing, because the environment cannot sustain that amount of waste, right? It's accumulating. So I think at some stage there will be a lot more initiatives from the brands, and they will be internalizing this. They will be internally motivated to do that, not always pushed by the consumers, because a lot of them started to realize this issue themselves. But I think it will take some time before we switch from this competition mindset to cooperation or competition, right? There is a competition and operation at the same time.
Good.
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Sila. So Nick.
Thanks, Paul. Hey, Mila, thanks so much for your presentation. It was really insightful. Enjoyed it a lot. apologies if this is a bit long-winded. I'm just curious because I really liked your examples that you gave about smoking, about gambling, and the environment, recycling, and so much. And I think something that's consistent through those examples, and even with my own research as well, is the emphasis on understanding the individual, or maybe in social marketing terms, a consumer, right? So it's emphasis on the individual and trying to aspire to some kind of behavioral change. And for me, you know, in doing research, it would be like, how do we get someone to vote for a pro-climate policy or something, right? So things like that. But I'm curious as to know your perspectives on the other side of that. So another way to look at it, right, is to say, well, what responsibility then is there on those in power positions in government or in corporations, the folks that have the ability to regulate, let's say, tobacco, or the ability to implement some kind of climate policy based on the evidence, right? So I'm curious as to whether you've done any research in the domain of understanding how social marketing fits into influencing like elites or more folks in power positions, or whether there is, maybe that's an emerging area of social marketing or something. I'm just curious to get your perspectives on that.
Thank you so much for this question. Personally, I didn't look at this area because it leans more into social policy and legislation, and I was more looking at social marketing, running experiments with consumers, trying to see which intervention would work on them or not. But I can give you an example from my PhD research, which was on advertising less healthy foods to children and how that leads to obesity and unhealthier choices. When I did my PhD, back then, there was a big debate on how should we legislate the prime times when we advertise to children. And a lot of countries back then, they were actually looking for research from social marketers to provide evidence that advertising leads to obesity. And there was no research that actually back then proved that causal link. And as long as you cannot prove this causal link, it's actually very hard to go to your legislator and say, hey, legislator, change it, right? Because the legislator needs evidence that this causal relationship exists. Some countries back then decided to legislate, to put certain regulations on children's viewing time and ban them during the prime times, and these were Scandinavian countries. But some other countries, they were actually waiting for it. So when it comes to social marketing and how we can then impact legislation, we need to run a lot of experiments. And they have to be very different. It should not be just intentions like I showed, because that's not enough. That wouldn't fly. You actually have to measure actual behavior. It might fly for a good publication, a good journal, but not for policy. Policy likes hardcore evidence when you track cohorts, and hopefully you do it longitudinally and you resurvey them at multiple times and you actually measure the difference. And I think this is where it also leans or correlates with what public health is doing, because then they are measuring outcomes, they follow a particular cohort and they show the impact. And I think when this happens, when we as a discipline would accumulate a lot of sound evidence, it would be much easier for legislators to then go ahead and say, okay, now this is what's happening, because the industry would not be able to argue back. And this is where I see the value of any sort of research and measuring social impact numerically. When you have a database and then you can go and show a correlation or the actual causal impact based on your intervention. Not sure if I am able to answer your question, but what I'm trying to say is that for anything which is very strict, very rigid, and something serious as legislation, there has to be evidence and proof.
Very, very good point. This reminds me of a number of trips I've taken to Parliament House with others. You know, we want to get a particular policy through, and we want ministers and members of Parliament to take on this policy. Those trips have not been alongside a social marketing person. And I think about this and say, instead of us looking at the minister or the member of Parliament as a policy maker or a member of Parliament, maybe we should have been looking at them as a consumer and applying the principles of marketing to a campaign instead of taking along a sheet with our policy proposals and sitting down with them. But that's just an example, you know, where social marketing, you know, start to think in a social marketing way and you change your behavior in terms of getting politicians on board. There is one question as we finish up, Mila, in the chat, which I thought was really interesting. Wajma has got a question around food insecurity, and then a question about, does marketing also have a responsibility to provide information about access to services and support? So at what point does the social marketer finish? What responsibility do they have outside of that? So if you can, I don't know whether you can see this, if you go up a bit to Wajma's chat question, can you see that, Mila?
Yeah, I can see that. When it comes to nutrition, this is such a contagious topic, to be honest. And because again, everything is about the evidence. If you want to prove that fast food leads to obesity, then again, you need to have a lot of cohorts that you track over time, and you have very detailed information about their dietary consumption so that you can actually compute the percentage of healthy versus unhealthy food and then make a decision. If we just ask people how often they eat it, it's not enough because they may be exercising enough, and that's why they're fit, right? So nutrition is very, very complex as a behavior. Whether we advertise at the same time the negative consequences of the product, I think that all comes down to legislation in each particular country, where, for example, if in some countries you say, okay, if you're advertising a sugary drink, then you have to say how many spoons of sugar are in there and what would be the health implications. I think it's possible to do that only when it's legislated. If brands do it on their own, I think they would sort of undermine the value of their product and they would scare the consumers. So I think from my personal experience, I haven't seen that very often happening when the brands would actually have such a disclaimer. I've seen it only happening when countries would actually legislate it. But I would think that long term, if we think about health and positive outcomes for the community, it's important in the outlets that we have, which could be schools or households or television or social media, to highlight the importance of healthier lifestyles. Because at the end of the day, it could be a choice of consumers, but when they are aware of all the negative consequences, then they can weigh the value, right? What is the value for them, short-term or long-term? Unfortunately, consumers are wired towards short-term value. I want pleasure now, good food, not long-term value. But that started to change because our generations are changing. This new generation is much healthier. So we see positive ripples.
Fantastic. And Carol, I notice, has been putting some messages up there, working quite well, I'm sure, about changing behaviour to get us all involved in the next seminar, which is on cultural approaches to healing and empowerment. You've also got the masterclasses that you can come to, and the outcomes measurement workshop in Hobart. So have a look at the chat for all those opportunities. But I'd like to finish now and thank Mila for a fantastic presentation, and a huge audience that we've had here, over 60 odd people online and more registering. You can get a copy of this from the CSI website later, so view it later. And thank you, Mila, for just a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Everyone can clap in their different ways.